everyone, and welcome to Mr. This is Africa, and here is Ethiopia. Now come on, let's have a look, shall we? Ethiopia, that symphony of mountain, jungle, desert and monsoon in the Horn of Africa, has a very ancient history. Its beginnings stretch back before memory to successive epochs of stone, until time's myopia becomes less severe, and we find the ancient inhabitants of the 2nd millennium BC ploughing the fields and reaping harvests of cereal grain. In the early 1st millennium BC, we see northern Ethiopia forming part of the Iron Age Damat kingdom, its capital likely being in Yeha, not to be confused with Noha. It traded with southern Arabia, amassing wealth by selling gold, ivory, slaves, tortoise shells and rhinoceros horns. Upon its decline, it fell into fragmentation, one of the fragments steadily bulking up over time and becoming the mighty empire of Aksum. It built up its wealth by gaining the monopoly of local trade routes and Red Sea trade with Rome and other states. Aksum is most famous today for its monumental obelisks, or stelae, particularly those constructed in the 4th century by King Ezana, who was the first African king to accept Christianity, thanks to the efforts of Frumentius here from the city of Tyre, who was instrumental in spreading the gospel to the people, and to this day Christianity remains the majority religion in Ethiopia. In the 6th century, King Caleb invaded Yemen to protect the Christians from being persecuted by the Jewish king ruling there. The Aksum Empire began to diminish after war with Persia, a process that accelerated with the rise of Islam in the 7th century, the Arabs taking control of the Red Sea, severing a key source of the Aksumite economy. Aksum was replaced sometime in the 10th century by the mysterious Zagwe kingdom, celebrated for its magnificent subterranean rock-cut churches. This one here is dedicated to St. George. Remarkable architectural accomplishments that have been attributed to the reign of King La Libela, who wished to build another Jerusalem after hearing about the Muslim recapture of the Holy City in 1187. The Zagwe dynasty was followed by the Solomonic dynasty, with conquering King Yokono Hamlak, who claimed descent from the Aksumite monarchs of old, who were themselves believed to be descended from the Queen of Sheba and Israel's King Solomon. Whatever their pedigree, the Solomonic emperors ushered Ethiopia into times of newfound power and greatness. Much of this was due to the conquests of Amdaseyon I, who conquered big chunks of land and wrested trade routes away from Muslims and spread Christianity into neighboring regions. Troubled times arose in the reign of Dawit II, as the Somali Adal Sultanate invaded, causing much destruction and misery, and coming close to snatching up all Ethiopia. But luckily Dawit had made allies with Portugal, who sent help, and Ethiopia defeated the Somalis in battle, and the country was saved. Both Christian and Muslim lands were weakened, and into the vacuum stepped the Oromo people, bringing about a big cultural demographic shift, and the Oromo are today the biggest ethnic group in multi-ethnic Ethiopia. Meanwhile, the Spaniard Ignatius Loyola, founder of the Jesuit order, sent missionaries to Ethiopia to turn the people towards Catholicism. This effort succeeded in getting Susenyos I to convert in 1622, but the whole thing was resented by the Orthodox Ethiopians, and naturally violence ensued, and Catholicism ultimately did not supplant the traditional church. A cultural peak was attained after Emperor Fasciletas established a new capital, and for over a century it flourished as a center of art, literature, and education. A considerable building program overlapped with heated theological debates. A final blossoming of culture occurred under Empress Mentuwab, but the empire was being dented and damaged through ethnic infighting and disunity, and a near century of division and anarchy ensued, in which the nation was split into small warring states. But one man sought to change this, Tewodros II. Above all, he wanted Ethiopia to be unified and strong and modern. Born into a harsh time of conflict, he employed his experience in warfare to crush his rivals and assert his power over various segments of the disjointed state. But his dream was not shared by others, and he faced constant backstabbing and disloyalty at court, while he was off campaigning against domestic rivals as well as outside Islamic invasions. In 1862, he sent an offer of alliance to Britain's Queen Victoria, which proposed a combined effort to destroy Islam. His message was hindered in the red tape of British Circumlocution Office bureaucracy as something not worth bothering about, as the British, for economic reasons, had no interest in launching a modern crusade. When Tewodros finally received this unwelcome reply, he imprisoned the British envoy and added him to his growing number of incarcerated Europeans. The British Empire responded by invading and crushing him. While Tewodros had failed in fulfilling his dream, the vision didn't die and was taken up by Johannes IV, who had more luck in expanding and defending his dominions. The situation improved further under Minilik II, who is considered the architect of modern Ethiopia. He went forth and conquered and consolidated and founded the modern capital and promoted modernization. And when war arrived with invading Italy, Ethiopia shocked the world by by winning, achieving a great victory over their outnumbered opponents in the Battle of Adwa. The 1920s saw economic progress thanks to coffee exports. The coffee plant originated in Ethiopia, by the way. And 1930s saw the coronation of Haile Selassie, a giant figure in his nation's history. He had been pushing modernization since 1916 when he was regent, and things were looking good. And oh look, an angry Italian, yes, Mussolini's Italy, suddenly and unexpectedly invaded Ethiopia in 1935. And it was war. This time the Italians came with aircraft and hundreds of thousands of soldiers, and by early 1937 Italy had conquered the country. Selassie went into exile in England and gave a passionate speech at the League of Nations which made him world famous, but did not garner the help he wanted for his nation. Meanwhile, the Italians abolished slavery, which had stubbornly lingered despite several Ethiopian efforts to quash it, and invested in infrastructure. But many Ethiopians took up arms to resist their occupiers, and the Italians dealt with them brutally. After the assassination attempt of this guy, the subsequent Italian crackdown saw a mass slaughter of suspected insubordinates. Perhaps as many as 30,000 people were killed. As the Second World War heated up, Britain found itself fighting Italy in Africa, and Haile Selassie was right there with them, eager to reclaim his throne, which he did in 1941 after the British were victorious. Selassie was keen on adding Eritrea to his nation with its valuable coastline on the Red Sea, and succeeded in gaining it in 1952. Now, as popular as Selassie was in the outside world, the Rastafarians of Jamaica worshipped him as the Messiah. He was increasingly viewed with disfavor by his own people. Human rights in Ethiopia were poor. There was war with Somalia and Eritrea, and poor management and drought, and there was a lack of reforms, and it all bubbled up into a boil, and there was a communist government takeover in 1974, with a guy called Mengistu gaining power as dictator soon after. What followed were several years of blood and hunger as Red Terror swept over the nation. Thousands upon thousands of supposed state enemies were butchered and tortured, and so-called land reforms loused up production quotas. Then Somalia invaded, but Ethiopia defeated them in the Ogaden War. But there wasn't a whole lot to celebrate in the 1980s, when a terrible famine saw 1 million people plus die with distended rumbling bellies in the dust. By the early 1990s, the communist regime was weakening. Mengistu fled the country. Eritrea won its independence, and democracy returned, with Meles Zenawi leading the country till his death in 2012. The economy had begun picking up steam, not helped by another war with Eritrea, but as it revived, the country's human rights record worsened, with violence frequently used to suppress dissent against the government. Mass protests seeking reform erupted in 2016, causing the Prime Minister to resign. He was followed by Abiy Ahmed, and don't be fooled by his name, he's a Pentecostal Christian. He promised hope, and delivered to the extent that he won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2019, having overseen several reforms and pushed for religious harmony and freed thousands of Eritrean political prisoners, and signed a peace treaty agreement with Eritrea. Of course, there remains a lot of work to do. The nation is still ranked low in the Human Development Index, but one can't expect overnight improvements in a country that has suffered so horrifically as Ethiopia has, and improvements are being made, and let's hope they continue and continue until they win the race, as so many races have been won by Ethiopians, among the greatest long-distance runners in the world. So best of luck to Ethiopia, but as for me, it's bye for now. Bye-bye!